What if I told you that the Nicolas Cage we see today, the man about to become Marvel's Spider-Noir on one of the biggest streaming platforms in the world, was once so financially destroyed that he was forced to sell a dinosaur skull just to survive? It sounds impossible, right? A man who earned $150 million, an Academy Award on his shelf, 2 castles in Europe, a private island in the Bahamas. A man who was, by every measure, untouchable. And yet, at his lowest point, Nicolas Cage owed the IRS $14 million and had nothing left to sell. This is the story of how one of Hollywood's biggest stars lost everything, and then, quietly and methodically, built his way back to the top. And why the Spider-Noir casting isn't just a comeback. It's the final chapter of one of the most extraordinary second acts in entertainment history. But before we get to how he lost it all, you need to understand just how high he climbed. Because the number I'm about to share with you is almost impossible to believe for a working actor. Nicolas Cage was born Nicholas Kim Coppola in 1964. Yes, of those Coppolas. His uncle was Francis Ford Coppola, the director of The Godfather. From the beginning, Cage had access to one of the most powerful families in Hollywood. But here's what most people get wrong about Nicolas Cage. He didn't ride his family name to the top. He changed his surname entirely, taking the name Cage, partly from the Marvel character Luke Cage, because he wanted to prove that whatever he became, he earned it himself. And earn it he did. Through the late 1980s and 1990s, Cage built a reputation as one of the most daring, unpredictable actors in the industry. Moonstruck, Raising Arizona. He played characters nobody else would touch, with an intensity that Hollywood simply hadn't seen. And then, in 1995, came Leaving Las Vegas, a role so raw, so unflinching, that it earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor. He was 31 years old. What followed was a run that few actors in history have matched. The Rock, Con Air, Face/Off, City of Angels, film after film, each one more commercially dominant than the last. By the early 2000s, Nicolas Cage wasn't just a star, he was a franchise, a brand, a guaranteed box office draw. And the money followed. $150 million in career earnings. In today's money, closer to $250 million. Now, what would you do with $150 million? Most people would invest it, save it, protect it. Nicolas Cage did none of those things. And the list of what he spent it on is so extraordinary, so genuinely unbelievable, that I want you to stay with me, because every single item on this list is real. At his peak, Nicolas Cage was spending money with a kind of calculated obsession. Not recklessly at first, but with the intensity of a man who had grown up watching Hollywood power and was determined to possess every symbol of it. 2 castles, one in England, one in Germany, a private island in the Bahamas, a jet, a yacht, 15 personal residences across the United States, rare comic books, medieval armor, a $276,000 white crocodile jacket, a pet octopus, specifically purchased, he once claimed, to help him with his acting. And then there was the dinosaur skull, a genuine Tyrannosaurus betaar fossil, purchased at auction for $276,000 in a bidding war against Leonardo DiCaprio. But the truth nobody really talks about is that beneath all of this, the financial foundations were already crumbling. Cage had placed his trust almost entirely in a business manager named Samuel Levin. And Levin, it would later emerge, had been mismanaging Cage's finances for years, failing to set aside money for taxes, making investments that made no sense, and systematically draining accounts that should have been untouchable. By 2009, the damage was irreversible. Nicolas Cage owed the United States government $14 million in back taxes. His properties were being seized. His assets were being liquidated. The dinosaur skull was returned. The castles were gone. The private island, gone. The man who had earned $150 million was, for all practical purposes, broke. Now here's where most people's version of this story ends. Broke actor. Lost everything. The end. But what actually happened next is the part that completely changes how you see Nicolas Cage, and honestly, how you might see your own setbacks too. The media had a field day. The headlines were brutal. Nicolas Cage, from Oscar winner to broke. Hollywood's most reckless spender. The rise and fall of Nicolas Cage. And the public largely accepted this narrative. that Cage had squandered his fortune through vanity and excess, and was now paying the price. And in the process, everyone missed what was actually happening. Because Nicolas Cage did not disappear. He did not retreat into silence. He did not file for bankruptcy and walk away. Instead, he made a decision that, in retrospect, reveals everything about his character. He went back to work. Not selectively. Not carefully. Relentlessly. Between 2010 and 2019, Nicolas Cage appeared in over 50 films. 50. Some of them were straight-to-video releases that critics dismissed without watching. Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance. Seeking Justice. The Frozen Ground. Film after film, many of them shot in weeks, in locations around the world. The public narrative was that Cage had become desperate, that he was taking any role offered just to survive. But here is a completely different interpretation of those 50 films. And this reframe is why, when the Spider-Noir announcement came, it made perfect sense to anyone who had been paying attention. Stay with me. Nicolas Cage had a $14 million debt, a team of creditors, and a name that still opened doors. And so he used the one asset nobody could take from him, his willingness to work, and he systematically paid back every dollar he owed. Not through self-pity, not through one dramatic comeback vehicle, through volume, through discipline, through showing up, film after film, year after year, in roles the industry considered beneath him. And here's what nobody calculated at the time. He was also keeping his craft alive. 50 films means 50 sets, 50 characters, 50 opportunities to stay sharp, stay present, and stay ready for the moment the right project arrived. That moment was coming. He just had to be ready for it. Before we get to the exact moment, everything turned. And it turned because of a film almost nobody saw coming. If this story is hitting differently than you expected, subscribe. Every week, we go behind the headlines and find the real stories behind the figures who shape our world. By 2018, Nicolas Cage had done something almost no one in Hollywood history had done before. And I want to be specific about this, because the number matters. He had cleared roughly $14 million in debt, not through a settlement, not through bankruptcy protection, but by working his way out, dollar by dollar. But clearing the debt was only the beginning. Because what happened in 2021 didn't just rehabilitate Nicolas Cage's finances. It completely rewrote the story the world thought it already knew about him. In 2021, a small, understated film called Pig was released to almost no commercial fanfare. Limited budget. No major studio backing. A simple premise. A truffle farmer in Oregon searches for his stolen pig. And Nicolas Cage delivered what many critics called the greatest performance of his career. The reviews were stunning. The Atlantic called it quietly devastating. The Guardian called Cage's performance a masterclass. Suddenly, the narrative that had defined him for a decade, the desperate actor, the reckless spender, the cautionary tale, began to collapse. Because what Pig revealed was that Nicolas Cage had never stopped growing as a performer. Those 50 films, those straight-to-video releases, those roles the critics had dismissed, they hadn't been signs of decline. They had been the work of a craftsman who refused to stop practicing. And then came Renfield. And then came Dream Scenario. And then came the announcement that stopped the internet. Remember the opening of this story? The man who once sold a dinosaur skull, who lost 2 castles and a private island, who the world had already written off. What I'm about to tell you is not just a comeback story. It is the most perfectly fitting casting decision in the history of Marvel. Nicolas Cage would voice and star as Spider-Man Noir in a brand new Prime Video original series simply called Spider-Noir. The character is a perfect fit. Spider-Man Noir is a Depression-era version of Peter Parker, darker, grittier, more morally complex than the classic hero. He operates in the shadows of a black-and-white 1930s New York. He is, at his core, a man who has been knocked down by a world that doesn't fight fair, and who gets back up anyway. It is difficult to imagine a character more suited to the man playing him. Think about that for a moment. A superhero born in the Great Depression. A man stripped of everything. His safety, his certainty, his comfort. Who chooses, every single day, to keep fighting. Nicolas Cage didn't just audition for this role. He lived it. The trailer has already accumulated over 25 million views. The anticipation is unlike anything attached to Nicolas Cage's name in over a decade. And on May 27, 2026, the final chapter of one of Hollywood's most extraordinary stories will begin. Nicolas Cage's story is proof that the fall is never the end of the story. The dinosaur skull was sold. The castles were gone. The headlines were merciless. And none of it, not a single word of it, was the final chapter. Because the truth nobody really talks about is that Nicolas Cage never stopped. Not for a day. He simply went quiet. He went back to work. And he let the work speak for itself. That is what an empire rebuilt on your own terms looks like. What's a moment in your life when you had to start over, when the path forward seemed impossible? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more hidden stories about the figures who shape our world.